Video 52D, the ESB capers. The ESB is the Electricity Supply Board in Ireland, and if you look at yesterday's Sunday Independent, dated the 12th of February, you'll see cash for ESB connections. And there's a tale in here that you wouldn't believe what's going on. Now, it deals with it down here on the front page and says here, senior managers at top building firms knew of payments. The managers of top building firms were paying DSB for connections and things that they should be entitled to as of right. Retiring ESB engineer wanted 35,000 for a new car, 35,000 euros for a new car. And the judge ruled Sunday Independent can report case in full. Now, you're only going to get the bones of it here. It might appear in an article online yet. I bought the paper because usually the Sunday Independent's no good. Usually no good. It never cooperated with anything. It could have done a bit of a feature with my campaign or something, and we always regarded it as a left-wing, hostile newspaper. But I bought it this time because it has done something good for a change. And I'd say the fact that it can't sell its papers and it is getting a lot of competition from British papers means that the old PALS Act that they play with the media in Ireland is challenged. They won't sell papers at all if they don't start doing their job. Now, in this case, it's headed here inside. ESB staff asked developers for backhanders. Are you with me on that now? Up to 35,000 was allegedly sought by workers in return for special treatment, the High Court told. So building companies and that, people who wanted to have connections, instead of just asking for connection, they would have to give them hello money. They'd have to give them money to do it. And it's very long to read, and I don't want to confuse you. But the first thing to remember is that the Sunday Independent, this paper, Sunday Independent, got the scoop, probably from whistleblowers, and it wanted to publish articles on it. And when they wanted to publish it, there was law. People went to court and tried to stop it. We're going to see what roughly this was about. Now, before we start, the judge did not agree that it should be done. But ESB staff have been accused of seeking unlawful payments of up to 35,000 euros from development firms in Ireland, and including Ireland's Sovereign Investment Fund. So Ireland's Sovereign Investment Fund, our taxpayers' money. Details of payments authorised by senior executives in the development firms. So these were development firms that were authorising the payment of money to ESB. Now, the development firm, and disguised as expenses payments to contractors. They told lies about what it was for, expense payments, were revealed in the High Court last week. The ESB is applying for an order to compel the development firms to detail all payments it made to DSB. Now, this might confuse an ordinary person, but it won't confuse me. Essentially, when the proverbial hit the fan, when it became known that this was out in the open, after probably years of it going on, the ESB top brass itself realised they were in a bit of bother. So they began to demand from these developers who they had given money to. They began to investigate their own staff in the ESB and the executives and all the various people to try and find out what they had been doing and what they had been receiving. You understand that now? So the ESB, they will say they were alert to it all the time. I would say it's just when they realised there was going to be an expose, they said, right, tell us who got money where. But they then went to the court. There was an application to court to try and stop this and to stop the publication. And this is kind of where it goes, right? Now, the practice first came to light last summer when Richmond Homes and Arkmount Construction, Richmond Homes and Arkmount, RRK Mount Construction, Richard Homes and Arkmount Construction, which are among Ireland's biggest home builders, complained to DSB that the level of cash demands from its staff had increased in the previous 18 months. Richmond and Arkmount developments are owned by Avitus Capital Partners, who run these building firms, whose financial backers include the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, us, the taxpayer. Imagine that. The State Sovereign Investment Fund, which is controlled by the National Treasury Management Area. So they always have their hand in our pocket. Always have their hand in our pocket. The development and construction company suspended a number of staff when the payments came to light last year. So the construction company realised they were paying this and they suspended them. Whether they were doing it with their approval or not, I don't know. The scandal has cost Richmond Arkmount more than 200,000 in legal related costs. See, everyone started suing when they were getting caught. In a 2-day hearing last week, Marcus Dowling, Senior Counsel for ESB and ESB Networks, same thing really, set out the evidence that the ESB had gathered thanks to the High Court discovery order secured against building firms last October. So the ESB, which was supplying connections to various building sites, giving them power and all of that, wanted to know from these builders who in their own organisation, in the ESB's organisation, were they paying money to. Okay. The evidence included an audio file of Donald Mulligan, the contractor's delivery manager in Arkman Construction, allegedly discussing payments of €10,000 he had agreed with a man alleged to be Alan Brown, an ESB design engineer. Well, I don't know whether it was him or not. I'm only reading what's in the paper. I'm not accusing anyone. There's enough of them to do that. The ESB became aware of the issue on the 5th of May 2022. The next day, the ESB engineer, Owen Judge, he just happens to name Judge, imagine that, Owen Judge, but he's not a judge, emailed Brian Tapley, the customer and project development management for ESB in the Northeast, to set out in writing what the two had discussed the day before. So, just to give you that again, the ESB became aware of the issue on the 5th of May. The next day, the ESB engineer, Owen Judge, he's not accused of anything, he emailed Brian Tarpley, the customer and project delivery manager for the ESB in the Northeast, to set out in writing what the two had discussed the previous day. He wanted to know what they discussed. Mr. Judge said he had heard that Mr. Mulligan had told an old colleague in the ESB there was a practice in North Dublin that construction companies had to pay cash to the ESB staff to get their various works completed. Imagine appealing to them for anything to do with the environment or anything else. And there was a programme on RT before with about these. They polluted the River Liffey. Big time. Polluted the River Liffey. Imagine that. Nothing was ever done about that either. Mr. Judge phoned Mr. Mulligan and asked the Arkansas manager had confirmed he and others had taken direct cash payments to ESB staff to ensure the work was done. He was accusing him of delivering the money. So that's Mr. Judge phoned Mr. Mulligan and said the Arkansas manager had confirmed he and others had made direct payments. So he's accusing Mr. Mulligan, it would appear. Mr. Mulligan is alleged to have said the going rate was €60 per metre installed. That's the going rate you have to pay in corrupt payments to get something which is already provided for in all our bills and in all the electricity bills. He told me that he felt it was getting to a stage where the cash payments was required every time the ESB staff member visited the site. Every time they arrived out in the car, they had to get a lump of money. Mr. Judge wrote. So Mr. Judge was doing his job. He said Mr. Mulligan talked of having made a recent payment of €240 to get 30 metres installed. 30 metres, that's for counting electricity, installed on time. He had to pay 240 to get them done, to get the work done they were supposed to be doing. Asked if the issues were confined to network technicians, the technicians were being blamed. Mr. Mulligan said it went higher than that. Mr. Judge apologised to Mr. Mulligan, who had worried if he made a formal complaint, he would adversely affect the business. So Mr. Judge, he did apologise to Mr. Mulligan, who was worried that if he complained about having to pay this money, it would mean they wouldn't get connections. The following week, Mr. Tapley spoke with both Mr. Mulligan and Sean McCallan at Arkansas Board Directors and Operations Director of Richmond Homes to arrange a meeting on May the 17th. In an email to his superiors on May the 13th, Mr. Tapley said Mr. McCallan had told him ESB staff had sought €1,000 to have a substation dropped at the site, asked for between 50 and €80 each meter installed in new homes. So they had their finger in every time a new estate was built and were looking for housing. They had their hand out looking for 50 to €80 for each meter installed in the homes, and looked for more than 1,000 to have lower cost designs produced for electrical works. They wanted €1,000 to have lower cost designs. Yeah, they were able to do a better, more efficient job if they got €1,000. Otherwise, you got the other old crappy, out of date, obsolete thing. Mr. Tapley's memo of the meeting with Mr. McCallan and Mr. Mulligan in Embassy House in Ballbridge, Dublin, on May the 17th, showed the developers were asked to detail their experiences with ESB on the sites in North Dublin. At the Oak Park site in Gilsini, Mulligan is recorded as saying power lines had to be diverted below the project to allow construction to begin. So there had to be a bit of diversion done. Alan Brown, the ESB's 38 kilowatt engineer officer for the site, was alleged by Mr. Mulligan to have pulled him aside in early 2021 and asked him to sort him out for a few quid. I want you to sort me out for a few quid before I move the line. Now imagine trying to get your housing plan up and to blame the like of me for objecting to developments because they're not done right, and to here's what actually goes on. Any wonder that they don't want the like of me getting involved in these inquiries and in the planning system. Mr. Brown is alleged to have offered to design a cheaper line diversion for the site that would reduce the developer's costs by $150,000. He had a better idea. Mr. Brown is alleged to have offered a cheaper line diversion for the site that would reduce the developer's cost by $150,000. How much would you say he wanted in return? In return, Mr. Brown said he would have wanted $35,000. So he's going to save them $150,000 because he obviously put in another plan which wasn't workable or was very expensive. And he wanted $35,000 as he was close to retirement, and he wanted a new car. You know, he wasn't going to be driving a caddy van anyway. He wanted a new car. Mr. Mulligan said he bargained Mr. Brown down to $10,000 and paid him $5,000 in mid-2021. Mr. Mulligan is recorded saying he still owed Alan $5,000 as he wasn't going to pay the full amount until the diversion was complete. On the same site in February last year, Mr. Mulligan alleged that his foreman had been told by Kieran Sharkey, an ESB technician, to pay the technician installing the connection €50 per meter, that's per house. Mr. Sharkey allegedly then asked for a tiler to do the work at his house. So he said, I'll tell you what, don't pay me anything, send up your tiler there and tile my house for me. Okay? The tiler was provided and charged €200 for the job he did, which Mr. Mulligan said was probably well below the cost of the job. Yeah, he was getting his house tiled to fix something which it was his job to do anyway. Mr. Mulligan said ESB cable pullers on the site were not paid because enough was enough. This Mr. Mulligan decided, we have enough paid to them. We're not going to pay. They wanted to pay the cable pullers to pull the cable in. At the Baldial Bayview site, where 2,000 units are being developed, the developers outlined how they had applied to ESB for a phase of connections in December 2021, but in April last year they were told the required engineer was on annual leave until May, so they couldn't get one. There was going to be a month before he came out to do it. They were concerned houses would be ready in June but without grid connection until October. They said their foreman was warned that if they kept ringing ESB Networks, they would be put on the back of the queue. So they kept saying, when are you coming out? Can you not come out here and do this, or send somebody out? And they were warned, if they kept ringing ESB Networks, that they'd be put to the back of the queue. As you don't ring up on us, we'll decide what you get. 6 meters were installed in March, and they said their foreman has to pay £75 each. That's not in the law at all. 75 euros each, 75 euros each. Mr. Mulligan is recorded as saying that prior to his development, his employment with Richmond Homes, the company had paid ESB technicians for meter installations on the site. Mr. Mulligan said the engineering officer responsible for designing the ESB connection for the site had not yet made any request for payment, but the ESB technician had told him on the site that the engineer really likes golf. He really likes golf. He wanted his annual subscription paid, or he wanted something, or a set of golf clubs. Nothing was paid or done on foot of that comment. See, he was doing it by someone else. At the Mariners Way site in Rush, Mr. Mulligan said he gave Stephen Darling, an ESB, I think I heard of him before, an ESB Networks technician, 500, and ESB Networks contractors another 300. So cable pulling and substation work could progress. He said his foreman was asked by Darling to pay technicians €50 a metre installed on the site, and that another ESB technician, Stephen Temple, was paid for installing 8 metres. Mr. McCallan complained that requests for payments had increased significantly. In the last 12 to 18 months, Mr. Mulligan said, we have attracted this as we gave into it. Yeah, in other words, by starting to give them something for doing what they were meant to do anyway, they attracted more demands for cash. On the 2nd of May, Mulligan and his foreman was asked by ESB technicians to pay for work to be completed. One reportedly said, I hope you have left a few quid for the lads, and did Stephen Darling get it all? Mr. McCallan said their foreman had been recently asked by Darling for €1,000 to deliver a second substation on the site. Now folks, that's long enough. The one thing I bet you they didn't do was record these fellas. When you're in that situation, always have a little dictaphone in here and talk away and catch them on it, because they'll deny all this happened. So it would help if they had to have tape recordings. But it shows you folks that this electricity, it's seen as a license to print money. You have a state body involved in it. It's corruption at a rate that you couldn't imagine, and they're all looking for their hands to be lined and all of that. And these are people in privileged positions in secure employment. It's more, it reads on there, and it's continued on page 12. Like that there is page 10, and then there's an advertisement for someplace, and then you have more of it here. ESB workers illegally sought thousands from firms for special service. We are taking it very seriously and are committed to investigating and taking it appropriately. And there's a big people writing there. Just look at the corruption that's going on. Just look at it. Where would you start? RTE did a programme on corruption with county councils. I don't hear any prosecutions out of that. And this is going on and going on and going on. The country is rotten to the core, and nobody takes it seriously. And this is why when you fight for the environment, or you try to fight for the proper enforcement of the law, I mean, where would you be going with these people? Where would you be going? They're only laughing at you. And the guards have no staff to investigate this. Hopefully, anyway, we'll see somebody walking up the steps of a court, and hopefully you'll give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down for bringing this to your attention, and to give fair play where fair play is due. Newspapers should realise they got to start doing this. They went to court to get the right to publish. That's what they have to do. They have to do that. And the other thing they need to do is start interviewing the likes of myself, my colleague Pat Swords, like a John Dooley, who are telling them now we are running into a massive scam and problem with all this idea that the simple Irish bill player for electricity can support an economy probably as big as France, probably 40 times bigger than the country of Ireland. This total mistake, that if you keep generating electricity and you can pull in all this money, putting in meters and putting in everything, you can do this forever. You can do this forever, when in fact all they're supplying is a bit of electricity into a hole in the wall, a socket in the wall. So thumbs up and a thumbs down, and we'll see you back for something else soon.